So once again, 8.4, solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. Okay. So once again, we learned multiple ways to solve quadratic equations. We first learned factoring. Then we learned to square root both sides. Then we learned to complete the square for quadratics that weren't factorable. We learned how to make them factorable and then square root it. So kind of combining a couple methods there. And then today I should say, we're learning the quadratic formula. Okay, do you need another copy? Okay. All right. So for the quadratic formula, this will work for any quadratic equation ever. We learned factoring doesn't always work. Sometimes we get it prime, so we learn how to complete the square. Square rooting won't always work because you won't always have something being squared necessarily, or won't have a good way to get something squared by itself. Quadratic formula will always work, okay? It'll work for any quadratic equation. However, it's a bit lengthier, okay? It's lengthier and there's more to remember, okay? So that's the downside to it. The upside, though, is that it works for absolutely any quadratic equation ever. So, and note, make sure that your quadratic equation's in standard form. Standard form, remind me, is what? That's for slope-intercept form for a linear equation. A
plus B. No.
Close?
A squared plus
B squared and C.
ax squared plus bx plus c. Ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? Now, this quadratic formula, what it does is it helps you find the x value. Okay? It helps you find what the x is, just like we have been. Like x is this, x is this, x is this. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, 4ac. And that is all over 2 times a.
What is this for?
It's called the quadratic formula. So, it'll work to solve for any quadratic equation. If you plug in your a, b, and c into this quadratic formula and compute, you will get your x value or x values. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2 times a. Now there's a song for this actually. That is a helpful way to remember it. It's put to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel.
X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
So that is the quadratic formula song. There are plenty of different versions for it. Yes, it gets loud, but it's a banger. So, fun fact: my first year here, one of my students liked the song so much that apparently, let me actually tell the story this way. So, I taught it like normal. And then the next day, I had another Algebra 1 class, so they hadn't learned it yet. So I was about to tell them about it, and I was like, so this is a quadratic formula, write it all out. And the student is just like, that's the song that he played yesterday. I'm like, what? He's like, this student heard this song in your class and then played it in advisory for 30 minutes straight yesterday. And it's like, on repeat the whole time, I guess. And so he's like, came in and it's like, that's what it was. And it was like all sorts of triggered. I'm like, that's great. I love it. I was really happy. So that's a helpful song. I'll link that in the Google Classroom as well. So that way you guys have access to that. So that way when you want to have an absolute banger. While you're running or doing whatever you're doing, you can have that, or help you fall asleep. Whatever.
I mean, if it's no, just
So back to the quadratic formula.
I can listen to after we drive.
So, does everyone have this written down? Yes. Okay. Good. I encourage you to practice writing this out for every problem you do. Here's why. The more you write it, what's it going to make easier? To memorize it. Because I don't make you memorize many formulas. Have I made you really memorize any formulas this year? I haven't even made you memorize that. No, this is like the one formula all year I require you to memorize. Okay? So I'm giving you guys a tool to do that. A couple tools. The song is a tool. Another tool is a strategy would be to continually write it out on each problem you do. Double check it's correct, and then continue on and use it. So, this number 1, we have 5 problems today, and that's it. Number 1, x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. We first must go through and identify A, B, and C. So, what is A?
X squared.
1. There's a 1 in front of the x squared. The A is whatever's with it. What's our B? Negative 4. What's our C? Negative 12. So I'm going to write out my quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All over 2a. Okay. And now I'm just going to fill in each of those. So as I begin to fill these in, I say, okay, x is equal to negative of b. So negative of, what's my b? Negative 4. So negative of negative 4. It will become positive 4 in a moment. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So what's being squared? Negative 4 is being squared. Minus 4 times a times c. So what's my a? 1. What's my c? Negative 12. All over 2 times a, which is 1. Notice my first step of the formula itself is just plugging in my a, b, and c. Everything else stays the same. The plus or minus stays the same, the square root stays the same, this minus stays the same, the 4 stays the same, the 2 stays the same. The A, B's, and C's get replaced, get substituted by our A, B, and C from our quadratic equation. Questions on that? From here, we're just doing math we've done before. We're just going to follow through order of operations, really. Now, a nice thing with the order of operations is if you want to, you can actually do what's out here the same time as what you're doing in here, since they're separated by a plus or minus. So what is the negative of negative 4 to start?
4.
Positive 4 plus or minus the square root of, okay, well, we see an exponent here. What is negative 4 being squared?
16.
Positive 16. Another trick here is since they're separated by subtraction, we can do this multiplication right now if we want. Because they're separated by subtraction, we can do this multiplication right away. Because multiplication will come before subtraction anyway, right? In order of operations, multiplication comes before subtraction. So we can do this multiplication now, knowing that these two are going to be separated so it won't affect our outcome. So what is 4 times 1? Okay, so negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. What's negative 4 times negative 12?
48.
Positive 48. Any questions on how I've gotten what we've gotten so far? Any questions on how we've gotten the 16, the 48, the 4, any of that? Okay, on the bottom, what's 2 times 1? 2. So now we say, okay, 4 plus or minus, can I add that 16 and 48? Yeah, they're underneath the radical together. aka it's like almost like a parenthesis in there. So what's 16 plus 48? 64. And I made my radical way too big, and that's fine. I could erase it if I wanted to. And go back and make it in a more normal size. Does this look a lot more similar to problems we've had now? I'd say so. Now wait, is the square root of 64? Do we know that?
8.
Yeah, it's 8. So we can call this x equals to 4 plus or minus 8 over 2. We've seen problems like this. What do I do at this point?
You split it.
I split it. I have to split it first. X equals 4 plus 8 over 2. X equals 4 minus 8 over 2. Now notice the only thing that changes was that plus or minus between the 4 and the 8. Everything else stayed the same, right? There's a lot of steps here, right? Okay. 4 plus 8. What's 4 plus 8? 12. X is 12 over 2. What's 12 divided by 2? 6. That's one answer. Other one, 4 minus 8. 4 minus 8. Negative 4. What's negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2. Those are my two answers. Now, this happens to be one that we could have factored as well. But I'm showing you that by doing all of this, we end up getting our x's. So if we were to plug negative 2 in originally, we get it 0 to be 0. If we plug in 6 into the x's originally, we get 0 to be 0. They both work. No other values would work, but we found the two that did. Do this formula involve any crazy math that's new to us? Honestly, no. No new math has been added today. But what was new? The formula itself, right? But do we know how to plug things into a formula? Yeah, we've practiced that a little bit. So we just plug them in, and we go through step by step. Now, what do we think our biggest potential for making mistakes on this is?
You plugging the numbers in?
Okay, plugging the numbers in is probably one of them. Where else do we think we might make might make mistakes?
Messing up the formula.
Okay, so plugging in the numbers wrong / a formula, or PEMDAS, right? As we actually go through it, is it possible that maybe we multiply something wrong, or we make one of those smaller computational errors? I was thinking that those are probably our biggest spots to make mistakes, okay? Getting the formula wrong / plugging things in wrong, or our computational errors. Those are things we have to be careful of here. That's why I'm encouraging us to continue to write that formula over and over and over again as well, to help us with memorizing the formula, so that limits the spots where we get something wrong. Questions on number 1 before I move to number 2. All right, number 2. We actually have to do something before we do anything else here this time, before we even do the A, B, and C.
With the
We have to add, not add 4, we have to add something else. Isaac, what do we have to add?
You have to move the B back.
You have to move the B term, add the X back. So we just practiced getting the C by itself last section, right? For completing the square. This process is different. We want it to be in standard form. We want it to be x squared plus x minus 4 equals 0. That's what we want on this one. Because now we know our A, B, and C. Because what's my A on this one now? 1. What's my B? 1. And what's my C? Negative 4. Those are pretty small numbers. That should be nice. Does someone want to tell me the quadratic formula so I can write it down?
X equals
Okay.
negative b
Yep.
plus or minus
Yep.
the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a.
Very good, very good, very good. And Courtney, thank you for offering to do that as well. All right, so I got to plug this in. Does anyone want to volunteer to try and plug this one in and tell me what to do? Okay, Courtney, go ahead.
you make the negative b and a 1, so it's negative 1.
Okay.
And then you make the
Okay.
And then we multiply the 4 by 1 and negative 4.
Okay.
And then we take all that over 2 times 1.
That'd be very good. Very good. So we end up getting x equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 4 all over 2 times 1. Questions on that so far? Alrighty. So we go through step by step. Well, what is negative of 1? Negative 1. Plus or minus, what's 1 squared? 1. What's negative 4 times 1? Negative 4. What's negative 4 times negative 4? Positive 16. All over 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Questions on how we got here? Alrighty. So we need to leave everything alone except for what's underneath the radical. What's 1 plus 16? 17. Now, do we know the square root of 17 off the top of our head? I don't think so. So if we're asking for the exact answer, are we done? Yeah. If it's the approximate, are we? No. So on this one, I'll just say the exact, so we'd be done. If I wanted the approximate, once again, like we were practicing earlier today, we'd square root 17. We'd say, hey, it's 4 point something. Close to that. And split the equations and continue on from there. Questions on number 2 at all? Yeah, Courtney.
On the test, will you be have calculators?
On this test, this will be the one test all year I allow you to have a calculator.
Okay.
Yep. All right, on number 3. Are we good to start listing our A, B, and C? No, we have to do what first? Subtract the 8, move the 8 over to the other side. And we end up with 4x squared minus 3x minus 8 equals 0. From here, what's my A, my B, and my C?
A is 4.
Yep.
B is negative 3.
Yep.
And C is negative 8.
Very good, very good, very good. Now, I did write my quadratic formula up here a moment ago, but I would encourage you to always write it again and maybe write it above the problem. I don't have any room on my screen to do that. We actually have some room above your problem on your notes to do that. And I actually want you guys to try plugging it in on your own. If you feel comfortable going farther, feel free to go farther. But right now, I actually just want you to even just plug these in. Plug the A, B, and C in and set up the formula. Ask me about it. Can I get a volunteer to help me set up this quadratic formula? Okay, Abby, go ahead.
Okay, so you're going to do negative of negative 3.
Okay.
Plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared. Minus 4 times 4 times negative 8. Over 2 times 4.
Very good, very good. Couldn't have said it better myself. If you don't have this, you need to have this. So adjust to it. Then from here, we say, well, negative of negative 3 makes what kind of 3, Brady? Negative of negative 3 makes what kind of 3? Positive 3. Plus or minus the square root of, what's negative 3 being squared, Jack? 9. Then we do negative 4 times negative 8. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Negative 16 times negative 8 is what, Emily? 128. Very good. And that ends up being a positive. And then on the bottom we have 2 times 4, which is what, Elijah?
8.
8. Very good, very good. So then we say, okay. Next step would be adding that 9 and 128 underneath the radical. And what is 9 plus 128, Abby? Abby Dasher?
That's 37.
Sorry.
9 times 1.
Plus, excuse me.
Plus is 131, right?
130, not 1, but 137.
7.
There you go. Sorry, I said times there. Now, do we know the square root of 137? No, it's not a perfect square. It's somewhere between 11 and 12, closer to 12. And if I'm just asking for the exact, we are actually done. If I'm not asking for the exact, I'm asking for the approximate, we would need to keep going. Or if I'm asking for both, we say this is one answer, but we keep going for the approximate. By approximating square root of 137 in our calculator, and continuing on by splitting the equations. Question on those two. Alrighty. I want you to go ahead and try number 4. Heads up, on number 4, one of your answers ends up being a fraction, and the other one does not. So we start by moving across our 28 to get this in standard form. And we get 3x squared minus 17x minus 28 equals 0. Our A is 3, our B is negative 17, and our C is negative 28. So we go to our quadratic formula. X equal to negative B, which is negative of negative 17, plus or minus the square root of B squared, negative 17 being squared, minus 4 times A times C, 4 times 3 times negative 28, all over 2 times A or 2 times 3 in this scenario. Negative of negative 17 is going to be a positive 17 plus or minus the square root of negative 17 being squared is 289. Negative 4 times 3 times negative 28 is positive 336. And 2 times 3 is 6. From there, inside the radical, we say, okay, well, 289 plus 336 gives us 625, which actually is a perfect square. What is the square root of 625? 25, the funniest number. All over 6. So we can actually split this up here, and so we do. X is 17 plus 25, over 6. And X is 17 minus 25, over 6. 17 plus 25 would give us 42. And what's 42 divided by 6? 7. That's one of our answers. 17 minus 25 gives us negative 8 over 6. Does that reduce? Yeah. Negative 4 over 3. And that's our other answer. Questions on that? Yeah, Eli. Negative what?
28 at the top. At the very top.
We have to subtract the 28 to move it over to get it in standard form. Yep, great question. Any other questions? Yeah. All right.
I thought it said blue.
All right, so once again, we're doing all of them, but just the exact.